Thank you. Morning, everyone. Um, Very happy to be here. My name is Qing Zhu from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Um, so I'm going to talk about ELM, the land component of E3SM, and try to convince you this is a useful tool. Um, and last year we did a very formal tutorial for E3SM, the entire model, and I was also there to talk about coupling and land surface. It turns out the workshop, the tutorial was very successful, but after a few months, then you forgot everything. So there's nothing left in your mind. So what I want to remind you that same thing gonna happen to you as well after this tutorial. So please remember my name, my email address. That is at least one thing you can keep in your mind. And if you come up with something, research idea, simulation requirements, computational resource requirements, you just send me an email. I can either collaborate with you or direct you to someone else who is an expert who will be responsible for that. So because of that, I'm going to change the title a little bit to convince you that how useful it is, ELM is. So there's no more technical details, but I think Tara will cover some later in tutorial. So I try to give you something that at high level, scientific question driven, and then give you some concrete example. How do we use this model to address ecosystem environmental science questions? But before that, just a little bit background. You might wonder where this model is coming from. This is a very young model. We did our 10-year anniversary last AGU, so this is the 11th year, and we're thinking about upgrade and the future renewal of this proposal. So it's going to be like 10-year efforts, and then we will propose another 10-year vision or strategy to convince DOE to fund another 10-year and go on. For other observational projects, you see a similar pattern. So this is the first time the DOE did for the Earth system model from the very beginning in 2014. So that's where we come up with a project. But where we are from, we actually from CLM. So the code base is from CLM 4.5 at that point. And then those two versions become different, follow different development track. And the DOE support the ECSM version, that's our formal name for this. And then the CLM still continuously uses CESM and CLM name. But you'll see there are a lot of difference as the time moving forward. What we are doing here is we do development, simulation campaign, and also one unique thing is we also do architecture upgrade. So that's why it's called ECSM, because we're target on the exascale. That's one of the E. That's the exascale, and we implement that. And what's going to happen next? That's the GPU. So it's going to be GPU-based architecture in the next 10 years. That's what other models they're not doing. Why we do this? Because DOE hosts the world-class computational resource and computing center. And we wanted to leverage on that and really make the Earth system model evolve at the same time when the architecture evolved. So what we do for science is we first define necessary development in the very beginning. So that's where I started this project, is actually from the very beginning in 2014. For each component, including land, we define what are the necessary components or mechanism processes are needed for the simulation campaign. And the simulation campaign is science driven. So you propose science question. And in order to answer that science question, that will require maybe factorial experimental design, maybe require a certain component like nutrient constraint, for example, so that then we backtrace what will be the next necessary development needed to support this the science campaign. So we did development in campaign 1, and we summarize, we identify critical biases, improvement need to be done. Then we do another round of development and campaign. So as we move forward from version 1, 2, 3, 4, we're now finalizing the version 3. Version 4 is already in development. As we move forward, we will have a more and more stable model because those features, sometimes they don't compatible with each other. you will see a model that's oftentimes fail or cannot capture what you want. But as you move forward, this is a young model, so I'll give it some time. Now it's working very well. I'm going to give you some results on that. Then this is the only technical slide I have. So in order to run it, let's say E3SM, ELM is a LAM component. What you're gonna do is you have spin up and also transient, right? So spin up means you don't know the initial condition. You don't have observation for that, say 1850 condition for vegetation, for soil, for everything, atmosphere, ocean. So you have a hypothesis of quasi-steady state. The entire Earth system is equilibrate at a certain level. So it also fluctuates up and down all those variables. But if you take multi-year average, it is at a quasi-steady state condition. So that's why we run blend only spin up and a couple spin up, try to make this system stable. That's the 1850 condition. Then you run the transient. So you will do that maybe when you do the exercise to run the ELM or to run the ECSM. Then you run transient, which means you start to have the transient changes of temperature. The warming signal comes in, the CO2 concentration keep going up. And so the land surface and other components receive these signals and try to keep pace with it. There's a lag to, let's say, build up carbon or something else. But technically, you just need to worry about whether your spun up state is steady, is a quasi-steady. If it is, then you are good to go to the next stage. And then you worry about the transient trend. That's maybe the warming response or elevated CO2 response. So for the steady state, you don't have observation. Maybe there are some C14 measurements about soil to inform the carbon stock, but in general, you don't. So you just have the assumption of quasi-steady state. You just check whether it is stable. But for transient, you have a lot of observation, including FluxNet, right? So you wanted to simulate a transient and make sure the last part, the final part of it, that's the present day, match the observation. So that's the general technical flow of what we do. Make sure it's steady state where we start from, and make sure you have a transient trajectory, and make sure the last part fit the observation. Okay. With that, then this is the land component. So you have the resolution is not good. So you have it's simplified the Earth system. If you look outside the window, it's so complicated. You have different tree coexist, but it simplified the whole ecosystem model as grid cells. Each grid cell is this. This is a soil column in the grid cell, representative for vegetation to grow. So you only have one soil column. However, you have multiple tree plant functional type or tree species growing here. So you can imagine this is not one single tree. This is it has maybe 50% evergreen, 50% deciduous. But they share the same column. So imagine they have their own roots, but they just mix each other and competing for the ground below ground resources, nitrogen, ammonia, phosphate, and also competing with these microbes. So in the end, what's going to happen in the model is it will calculate the balance of C and P and make sure they are balanced. So the tree can build biomass. It has CMP ratio stoichiometry. In order to build 1 gram of dry mass, you have to harvest this amount of CO2 from the atmosphere and nutrient from soil after the competition. So with that, then the tree can grow, right? So imagine during this process, if you have a limited nutrient supply, then the tree growth will stop. If you have enhanced CO2 concentration, you have more CO2 carbon coming in, then the plant potentially can grow faster. So that's the underlying logic about behind this. And you have a whole competing network here. In order to be successful, the plant has plant traits. You have to harvest CO2 nutrient in a favorable way, right? If the tree decides to grow fast, so it would invest a lot of carbon to grow stem. That's one of the traits. So you have less resource to grow the fine roots. You have less competitiveness. Then it will feed back to the plant growth. So it will suppress the plant growth. So certain tree or certain plant function type with some plant traits or root traits they will be favored under certain condition, depending on the climate condition, depending on the resource supply, depending on whether this is a nitrogen fixer or not. So this is a very complex system, but you don't need to really understand all these components. All you need to understand is at high level, you need to have CMP coming into the system in the consistent way. They have to follow a certain ratio, and you have to have enough water supply, which I didn't put it here, and to make the system evolve. When the tree dies, the carbon will come down to the soil and build up soil carbon. So that's it. And this is the upland version, and for the wetland, the original version is very old, 2011. So you have basically two components. One is the water table go up and down. So you have in the inundated fraction and the uninundated fraction. They have different VGC cycle, VGC codes, and Tara just updated. Maybe Tara can explain that more. So meaning you have explicit wetland PFT. So these are implicit. Now we have explicit PFT vegetation for each wetland column. So that's it. If you just care about the land surface, so there are just upland and wetland. So if you have any detailed question, we can discuss later. My main goal today is to answer these three questions at high level again and give you some example. This is the most frequent question that I was being asked is ELM accurate? Of course it's not. You're skeptical. I'm also skeptical as a developer and as a user. So what we're gonna do, simulation and benchmark, be very careful about that. And second is a question that you might be very, very interested in because you might have some experience about observation. You might actually doing the measurements or you have synthesized a data set. How can we use ELM to combine with this data and to answer a science question? And third is maybe something you can think about later when you develop a project, when you write a proposal, right? How to advance the science, a certain discipline, through this combining ELM and data. So you have simulation plan, you have also observational plan, and how those two components can come together. Okay, so first, simulation and benchmark. ELM is accurate to some level. So always be careful about the context. So you won't have a model that is accurate for everything. Remember, this is an Earth system model or land surface components. You have so many different variables in this system to simulate. And the ELM is just a hub to provide you a continuous long-term time series about everything in this system. And you try to match it with maybe a single point observation or maybe a remote sensing derived regional observations. It's just not fair. Why? Because you have partial information and ELM has to worry about the whole system. So when we develop and calibrate it, we don't just look at, let's say, GPP. We look at the entire carbon cycle and water cycle. We have to make sure the model not doing a bad job for a certain variable. It can be good at something, bad at something, but in general, it cannot fail badly on something. So there is a compromise we have to make. So every time we develop a model, make some new developments, we run through this ILAM tool. That's the email. That's the website address you can check, and it has all these observations. Elias will talk about that. So we run through it and check if it's purplish. That means the model is good. This is the example for CIMIC model. And you will see all those CIMIC models, there's no one single model can do everything correctly. The ensemble mean is relatively better, but there are some variable like soil carbon is not good. So imagine ELM or ESM is also doing the same thing. So what you can do is you have your observation of interest. So make sure that is your priority, but do not violate other observation too much. Otherwise, you are getting a right answer with a wrong reason. Something else is wrong. And just coming back to ELM, we have multiple versions. Now we are at version 3. So this is just an example of how we use the benchmark system to make sure the model is not going wildly. So this is from V1, V2, V3, driven by different climate forcing. This is water cycle forcing, that's another forcing. This is GSWP3. So we'll see the model version evolve from 1, 2, 3, evolve moving forward. The complexity becomes higher and higher. But what we're trying to do is to make sure the model won't fail for any, completely for any of these metrics. So that's it. That's why we care. And what's left over is for you, right? You have site level observation. Based on this, you want to calibrate the model to fine tune it to make sure it's compatible with your site, right? Or at the scale that you care about. So that's all I wanted to say. It's not accurate, but it's useful and you need to fine tune it. And second example, how can we use it to address hypothesis? This is an example that we're thinking about this CO2 acclimation. So when CO2 concentration go up, based on optimal theory, the Rubisco enzyme activity will go down. So you have a lower value of VC max 25, which is reasonable. But what's the impact? So based on the observation, you might generate that hypothesis, but you don't know the quantitative answer. When that happened, let's say in the 21st century, how much carbon will be additionally saved because of that hypothesis. So then this case is a very useful case that you can use just ELM as a modeling testbed, and then modify the model minimally. So you just need to build a linkage from the downregulated VC max 25 to the resource that available to used by other components. So what we did here is very simple, just a few lines of code change. Make sure every time you have a VC max, acclimated VC max, and then you back calculate the CN ratio to satisfy that, which is obviously higher than the baseline CN ratio. So you have additional nutrient becomes available. Then you just allocate it based on the whatever already have the allocation scheme in the ELN to make sure it's freely allocated to other components. So you have under different scenario with and without the CO2 acclimation and nutrient feedback, you have the leaf area differences in the leaf area expansion and also leaf nutrient concentration. And the consequence is this is the answer to this science question. So reallocation is excess nitrogen from the downregulation of CO2 Rubisco enzyme. This will generate roughly 50% more carbon in the ecosystem. That's a huge amount, right? And it accumulates. So you can imagine just a few lines of code change will give you a big number. Maybe it's just valid for this case. You might have a hypothesis to test and find it's minimal. You only have 1 or 2% of change. That's okay. But all I want to say is this is a solid test bed that you can make use of. And sometimes it's just a few lines of code change can answer your science question. I think I have to move faster. So second is mechanistic interpretation. And nowadays people are always talking about machine learning, data-driven emulation. But what the process-based model is useful is you can use it. It simulates all those components and also the feedback linkage. So you can use it to interpret it because it simulated, right, this feedback. So this example that we did for near surface land atmosphere feedback. So if you're doing this for maybe carbon GBP or ET or latent sensible heat, you can do similar things. So we benchmark the system for this variable, make sure this is good, and we also develop the feedback metrics to quantify the strengths of the feedback. And then we run future scenarios. So now you can interpret it mechanistically. So for future, you have CO2 concentration increase. You also have warming. You have two effects: physiology effect and radiative effect. So you can run factorial experiment, and then use an ELN this network to tell you the changes of this network under these two CO2 polarization and CO2 radiative effects. And it will tell you that it is actually the radiative effects dominating the feedback strengths of the near surface land surface. And you can also plot it because ELM give you all the variables, right? You can correlate it with any variable that you want. In this case, that's a neutron uptake feedback strength to the GBP that is really correlate very well with this land atmosphere strengthening of the coupling link. So that's the mechanistic interpretation. So remember, it gives you the entire network. It's not the data-driven approach. So this is what you want for your mechanistic interpretation. Make use of all those possible variables and to really find the answer to your science question. That is what I try to say here. And the last part, to think about MODEX. So you probably will write a proposal in 5 years. So thinking this way, you make a measurements or you're a model developer, you do a model developing. So how much science has been advanced given that? So it is, sometimes it is not what you measure or what you model, it is which gap you fill. So first you have to find a gap. In order to find a gap, you will need to find a gap in the model and in the data. So first is the gap in the model it can be just easily done by just running model ensemble, try different parameter combination and see if it can match the observation. If not, maybe some processes is missing. If it is, you will identify some key metrics, that's the variables, that's the parameters, or sometimes it's often you have a measurable traits in the field, has a large uncertainty. So that you can go into the field, so you identify the gap is on the model, you go to the field, measure it, reduce the uncertainty. That's the proposal, right? You advance the science. You will be better to answer related science questions. So that's for the model data to model part. And the model to data part is, this is example for wetland. So you don't have global wetland emission. You only have bottom up estimate from grid cell estimate from models. So this is the model estimate. It's not true, but it gives you a sense where you should sample, right? If you try to find a spot to deploy your measurements and to make a long-term observation. So you don't want it to put it here because that's going to have minimal science impacts, at least for the method emission. So what we can do is you can sample these, you do model simulation, global pattern, and you do hypothetical sample from this global map, and you can calculate how much of the contribution your new sample will be contributing to recover the global map. This is example for that I sample EC sites, all the existing FluxNet EC sites. That's the network 1, blue line, and network 2 is the EC plus chamber size. So you'll see the chamber size is very helpful at the boreal Arctic region. If you don't have that, you're gonna miss a lot of flux, overestimate a lot of flux. That is what you can learn from data to model and put them together. You have a very healthy cycle of model data. Model can improve data sampling. Data sampling can further improve model, either structure or parameterization or simulations, and then go on. So that's the logic of a research proposal and how you advance science. And ELM will be an important component. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Elastin, that's my name and email. I don't.
I really like the hypothesis testing that by like trying to test like how that down regulation can influence the carbon storage. I guess the question is for that project, have you done any like model benchmarking to make sure whatever you saw from the model simulation is not an artifact?
Model benchmark. It's well, yes, I think it's this question is broad enough to a lot of science questions. So if you wanted to do a hypothesis testing, this is the benchmark. So pick a version you start from. It's already benchmarked through the island, through a lot of land variable, hydrology, carbon. Make sure your version is what you want. If you're in this case, if GBP is what is very important, then you wanted to pick these versions. GPP is here. You wanted to pick these versions rather than other versions. So that's where you start from. You already benchmark. The system is working pretty well for all the variable in general and particularly for GPP, right? Because GPP is the focus. Then you modify the code. That's the code change. And then it help you to quantify the impacts, but whether or not it is real, we don't know. Then it will lead to the next part. So that's actually hypothesis testing. Then it will lead to a new requirements for the observation, right? So it probably require new sampling at the elevated CO2 observational site to verify this hypothesis. But this is something that we can do for the model and to generate some new science question as well.
Right, but I guess like for some kind of this hypothesis testing, do you think it's actually more important to benchmark a certain process instead of benchmark a variable like GPP, such as like a functional relationship between, for instance, GPP and maybe LAI or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I will direct this question to Elias later. He will introduce this ILM system. So it has variable benchmark. It also has relationship benchmark. So behind this variable, there are all kinds of relationship. The scoreboard you see here, this is a scoreboard. This is an integrated scoreboard. It has spatial information because it's a global model. It has temporal variation. It also has variable to variable relationship. So it will condense all the information to a single scoreboard, right? So if it's exactly right, I'm not sure, but it's not that bad, right? Everything, variable, magnitude, the variation across time, spatial heterogeneity, I would say, and also the variable to variable relationship all come together. It's not that bad. Yeah.
This part, you just need to say some very quick change from the yellow or purple to the yellow.
Right.
As a experiment. And the soil company is opted.
Right.
You have a.
So, soil carbon is something very hard to simulate in this system. So I should only copy and paste a partial table of this because all these are water cycle 2 forcing. Water cycle 2 forcing, those are not reanalysis forcing. These are ECSM internally generated coupled forcing. Why we do this? Because ultimately, these version will be coupled. This is also water cycle 2. This version will be coupled into the full ECSM, right? So if you calibrate the model using the reanalysis data and you couple back, however, the couple system give you these forcing. So when you will expect a degree of model performance, that is what we wanted to test here. How much of degrade in terms of model performance when we couple it back? It's just an experiment. So what we need to pay attention to is, so remove these orange columns and just look at these columns. Again, soil carbon is very hard to simulate. Why? Because this is a very slow process. You accumulate carbon because of the balance of vegetation and soil respiration. A lot of parameters, you might think they're not linked to the soil carbon accumulation, but they are. Ultimately, they control soil, they control vegetation, and then they contribute. So when it's easier to get these fast evolving processes, GPP, LAI, correct, but it's much harder to get soil carbon correct in any model. Yes.
So I have a question. I should confess I'm at NCAR, so I'm used to doing this in CSM, but I'm curious how you do it in EPSM. How do you make decisions on like what is good enough to go into the coupled model? And do you prioritize, say, like hydrological cycle variables over things like soil carbon and say like it's, good enough for the coupled model? Like how do you go about that trade-off process?
Right. First order important thing is the aerosol related effects, because in terms of coupling, because that's the major component of the relative forcing and how actually how much of net radiation forcing you see at the surface. So there's a lot of tuning on that. However, land surface receive that signal, right? After the atmospheric aerosol calculation, you have the surface radiation and temperature. So with that first order thing gets, the guarantee is reasonably good. Then we move on to land surface and make sure this table look good, right? And then we couple it back and simulate. The second thing is the internal climate variability. That's the ENSO, AMOC, those stuff. And those things are even harder because it's internal variability, right? It's very difficult to simulate. So right now, I would say the version 3, we are pretty confident about land and atmosphere. Ocean BGC, although it's being integrated in V1 already and a V2 on the development, V3 now we are coupling it back, but it's still challenging. It's much harder than the land atmosphere part. Yeah. Yeah.
For the remote TV showing part, what's this scale of simulation we did?
Yeah.
Like regions or I mean some of the variables?
Yeah. So two things I want to mention here. One is this is all I mentioned. These are grid cell level, 50 kilometer scale grid cell level simulation. So be aware of that because when you compare with a site measurements with FluxNet measurements, that's a few kilometers. There will be a mismatch, right? So if you wanted to do a direct comparison, you want to run your own site level forcing, then you can make sure the scale match. In a site level forcing, you use the FluxNet provided climate, right? Kilometer scale, temperature, wind speed, pressure, everything. And also you can look into other soil database like soil grids to find the local information of soil properties. And also at the site, you probably also have a lot of vegetation trait measurements, right? Leaf longevity, CN ratio. Those are the parameters that you wanted to specify to run your own real single site level experiment to compare with the data. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And so a global model and site level. And the second thing about scale is the temporal scale. So all this benchmark only care about monthly or annual, but at the observational site, you maybe care about 30 minutes fluctuation of the measurements. The model, although generate 30 minutes estimate, but we never look at it, at least myself and the people that I know, because that scale is not persistent scale. We care about seasonal, sub-seasonal, decadal, and maybe up to the 21 end of 21st century. That's the time scale that we care about. So again, that means when you compare with half hour, even though the monthly measurements match with the ELM estimate, but the 30 minutes measurements could be largely different from what the model generates. So again, then you will need to come up with a hypothesis why the model is biased in that way. Then you do some model hypothesis testing, model code change, and fix it and make sure it works. And then you answer the science questions. That's the flow. Thank you.
So question, in a diagram, the atmosphere feedback network from the paper, the LE and H is the other center of the atmospheric emissions. That is why, yeah. I was wondering how does the uncertainty in LE and H affect the whole process, the whole GPP and also one cycle and the ESM?
It's the reason why I pick this extratropical forest is because the global bias concentrated at tropics. So for latent sensible heat, ET, tropical forests oftentimes not just the ELM, other model as well. They simulate a few months time lag up to 6 months. So 6 months time lag means the cycle is opposite. Right? A few months time lag up to 6 months. of biases, seasonal cycle biases compared with the data. So there is a high bias. There's a lot of model issue there. So I just picked this system, and then this is reasonably, the model simulate very well in terms of LE and SH, GBP and everything. So this is the system that I can make use of, like the best system I can make use to demonstrate this idea.
Do you have any idea if the 5 people that observation is biased?
Oh, if the observation is biased. So how big of a differences will make for this analysis, right? If the observation are biased.
Or yes,
It's, so the observation is here. Observation, land component, all, and the atmosphere component, land component. So if we look at the green, these are the observation. So if it's biased, then we will see a change of this. So let's look at the multi-year average. So this is the all feedback strands. If the observation is biased, you will see this bar coming up and down. If it's biased to some level, I think it's fine because of the uncertainty already exists in the model when compared with the data. If it's a lot, let's say only 50% of the connection is verified in the observation, then that will be a big problem. So then I won't do this analysis at all. I will go back and check which connection is broken in the observation, right? Because of the observation biases, or you have a different data set. And then that will guide me through the ELM simulation to check the ELM simulation, whether that is also a problem in the model as well. Yep. Right, thank you.
So we're gonna have a break for 15 minutes, and then, yeah, we'll start the Docker tutorial. So let's be back at 10:05. So yeah, that's it.